Ukraine, where Joseph Lindsley is, and let's find out what the latest is. Joseph, hello to you. I'm wondering today if Putin is trying to have it both ways. He needs Prigozhin's Wagner group to fight in the war, but he condemns his actions as treasonous, doesn't he?
Hey, Bob. Good afternoon from Lviv. Yeah, it's quite strange. I mean, the fact that it seems that Prigozhin is he's not under arrest. We don't, of course, know everything for sure, but it seems that he's a free man in Belarus. And it's strange because in Russia, if you even call Russia's war on Ukraine a war, you go to jail. Your average granny could go to jail for simply calling this a war. And Prigozhin, when he seemingly led a revolt and was, under 2 hours from entering Moscow, he's allowed to go free. That's very curious, and that seems to show a regime that is very weak. But it's strange. I think that it always seems that there's always someone driving us to be afraid. If you look at the headlines at Drudge Report or even the respectable Financial Times today, the sort of the theme is, what happens if Russia becomes unstable with the fall of Putin? And it's interesting that they would use these words. Everyone uses that word, unstable. I would say for everyone here in Ukraine, Russia is exceedingly unstable. They have an unstable leader that has unleashed hell on Ukraine for 16 months and terrorized the world. But for some reason, we shift without realizing it, I think we shift our perspective, letting Russia control the narrative. And, it's as though anything that Russia does should make us more afraid. And if you really examine that argument, it means ultimately surrender. It means they have nukes and they're crazy, so we should just be quiet and give them whatever they want. And this article in the Financial Times today quotes a lot of anonymous European and NATO officials, and they're worried about so-called negative outcomes as a result of this so-called insurrection. Again, we don't really know what it was, I don't think the story quotes a single actual person. It's all anonymous people saying, that this is a cause of great concern. And then you have the Hungarian prime minister today is saying that Russia is stable. He's been an ally of Putin, even though Hungary is in NATO. And he says some very chilling words. He says this is Viktor Orban, the prime minister of Hungary. The problem is that Ukrainians will run out of soldiers earlier than the Russians. And there's a truth to that. Russia is a much larger country. They care less about their people, as we've seen with Wagner, the way they threw bodies into Bakhmut. And so in the face of this chilling fact, but also recognizing that there is some kind of new weakness and chaos in Russia, Ukrainians argue this is the moment to increase supply for Ukraine. It should force, or I guess Ukrainians hope that this forces the uncomfortable question that people in the Pentagon and people in Brussels really don't want to consider. What is Ukrainian victory? And, can Ukraine take Crimea back? Can we put a stop to the tyrannical regime in Moscow? Do we have to continue living in this world, the world of Henry Kissinger, who, as I've mentioned, last year in December, he wrote that the world needs Moscow in the balance, in the global equilibrium. And Ukrainians and those who want freedom say, no, we don't. We don't have to live in this tyranny. And now, hopefully, you would think with this, whatever happened, that circus on Saturday in Russia, then maybe it would inspire people to say, hey, we can stand up to this. Instead, though, we see a lot of fear from leading officials. And Australia today announced that they're sending their biggest package yet to support Ukraine. But if you look closely at it, they're sending old, outdated vehicles from the Vietnam War. They're not sending their new technology, not even technology from 20 years ago, but from the Vietnam War. And when you see this, it seems that the politicians want to be able to tell their people, oh, look, we're giving lots of support to Ukraine, but they're afraid to actually send the best stuff. And so it puts Ukraine in a bad position because your average person thinks, oh, hasn't there been enough to Ukraine? When really that support is not what it seems. And, last week we heard about the Pentagon discovering just a small error, $6.2 billion accounting error. What a luxury to have. And the people took that in the wrong way. They said, there's $6 billion extra floating around Ukraine. But that's actually not the case at all. This accounting error actually shows us the smoke and mirrors of Washington accounting, which is it was simply evaluation. And as I've said before, when we think of American aid for Ukraine, these are figures and values, but they're not actual. It's not actual money. It's not checks being written. Mm-hmm. It's the value of the old equipment that's coming here, and the Pentagon simply overvalued some of the old stuff. So there's no $6 billion missing. It was always imaginary. And so amid all this murkiness, this is Ukraine and its best allies, including people like Boris Johnson, are saying now is the time to get serious about it. And you have to force the question, is it possible to break down the Moscow regime? Can Ukraine take Crimea? And then meanwhile, on the micro level, as this is happening, we have all these windows of opportunity. Ukrainians are seemingly advancing extremely slowly, but methodically in the counteroffensive. But the toll, as I know personally, and as everyone here knows, the toll is heavy. And that's why, for example, on the micro level, like right now, we are raising money for a night vision for a soldier named Yarko. He and his brother signed up to fight in the early days, the early hours of February 24th. And he was in med school. So he's a medic and he needs a night vision. So at nighttime, he can go and find Ukrainian soldiers who are wounded and rescue them and try to save their lives. And so this, everyone, it gets down to that level of detail in order to push back against this Russian tyranny.
The news out of Kiev today, they say they're gaining territory, and they've taken some territory in the western region, previously occupied by Russia, the Donetsk region. But Joseph, isn't this the time that Ukrainian forces should be making a major move on the Russians? How come that hasn't happened yet in the middle of all this chaos?
Well, the Russians had many months to prepare through the winter, and they have in the fields of Zaporizhia and Donetsk, these beautiful fertile fields. The Russians have mined them. They have rows and rows of defenses, and so Ukrainians have to, it's a slog through the forest and the fields, meter by meter, feet by feet, to push back. The Russians have pretty strong defenses, and we've seen that Ukraine does not. The Russians have air superiority. Ukrainians cannot easily attack with aircraft the Russians, and so that's why this is a long slog. And this is why Ukraine was saying for a long time they wanted fighter jets. They have not received those yet. This is why almost everyone I know who's connected to the military in some way, which is everyone here, is working to get drones for individual groups of soldiers so they can spot the enemy. As I told you last week, I saw the video of my friends. The Russians are very close to them, shooting at them through the trees. It's very intense warfare, and it's very slow. And meanwhile, I'm sure that there are plans that we won't know of until they happen, but to strike Russian bases in Russian territory and to strike Crimea. But this really requires the support of Western leaders. And as we see now, in the response, it's quite amazing. You would think that the response to Saturday would be greater strength from Paris and Brussels and Berlin, but we're seeing sort of weak knees. And Howard Buffett, the billionaire brother of Warren Buffett, he's spent a lot of time in Ukraine. He's really helped a lot of micro projects here. You see his name around. He's been to some dangerous places. And he said sometime in the past 24 hours, we are not providing Ukrainians with everything they need to win the war. And worse, he said, we are asking Ukraine to fight this war in a way that we would not fight it ourselves.
And again, listeners who want to help the cause, best to go to UkrainianFreedomNews.com, right, Joseph?
Yeah, we're going to get this night vision for Yarko. Every week we're going to try to get something new to help the counteroffensive. So UkrainianFreedomNews.com, tax-deductible donations.
As always, we appreciate your insights and look forward to our conversation tomorrow, Joseph.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you for introducing Ukraine on your social media pages. That's very important that much more people can get more information about the situation here and how everybody can help Ukraine to stay stronger and to save all the world.
Що сказав? Well, which side are you on? На чьей ты стороне? Come on now. Oh, which side are you on? На чьей ты стороне?